part of the reason that I did some of the guidance more on concentration just now was because that's sort of where we have landed in our path, in our Eightfold Path study. And we talked a little bit about wholesome concentration last week, and that there are some other levels of mental concentration. Generally, in order to access that kind of concentration, it's you need longer periods of time for meditation, like at a retreat usually, or something like that. It's not very easily accessed moment to moment. And so it's not really talked about that much, but it's part of the Buddhist teachings, and it's when you read the Parinibbana Sutta on what words he spoke in the last part of his arrival toward death. The Parinibbana Sutta is an amazing sutta because it patterns over several days of when he's walking to the place where he's going to die. He got food poisoning, and he knows, and he has to try to put all of a sudden, well, it's not all of a sudden, but he does manage to put, it is recorded later in the Parinibbana Sutta, some of what his main teachings are. And so, there are places where he gives guidance for meditation, which is usually a concentration meditation. And then in the last part in the Parinibbana Sutta, he also talks about the importance of certain studies, like of the enlightenment factors and the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and basics, foundations of mindfulness. And in that translation, in those translations, it talks about how he goes into these jhanas, these absorptive states. I should see if I could find it, although that's getting sort of sutta nerdish of me. But it talks about each of the states that he goes into, consciously going in and consciously coming out, and consciously going in and consciously going out, and then the last moments of his life. And then the quote that I say at the end of each of our sittings, Anicca Vata Sankhara, is the final words that it was said, that he said. Of course, there are various translations, but they pretty much all agree that those were his last words, in which, it gets translated different ways, but in which he basically says all conditioned things are impermanent. They arise and pass away, and that one should guard one's thoughts and, do the practice. Don't delay. So these various stages of absorption can be reached. Pretty difficult for ordinary householders. Usually it's monks and nuns and people that have dedicated their life to finding it easier to keep out the hindrances. Because, there are these 4 different stages. There are actually more than 4, but it's kind of consolidated down to 4. And in the very first jhana, passions and desires and unwholesome thoughts are released and let go of. And so when a person can dwell in the first jhana, they feel rapture and a deep sense of well-being. And in the second jhana, where there's intellectual activity, that intellectual activity fades, and it's replaced by a tranquility and a one-pointedness, a single-pointedness of mind. And the rapture and sense of well-being of the first jhana is still present. In the third jhana, the rapture fades and is replaced by upekkha, by equanimity and great clarity. And so having the fourth jhana, all sensations cease, and only mindful equanimity remains. And in some schools of Buddhism, this fourth jhana is also described as pure experience with no experiencer, that through this direct experience one perceives the individual separate self to be a total illusion. And so these four states can be cultivated. It's written about in a lot of places. There's something called four immaterial states, and there's infinite space and infinite consciousness and non-materiality, and then neither perception nor not perception. And this is enormously subtle work, and it's really pretty much possible for very advanced practitioners. But it's interesting in our society of Westerners who, first learned bhavana before learning the actual foundation of harmonious living, of generosity, dana, and then sila, harmonious living. The Buddha taught dana first, and then sila, harmonious living, and then bhavana, the meditation. And as Westerners, we've learned meditation most of the time first. And a lot of Westerners especially keep seeking, wanting to know more about the jhanas. And it's interesting because it's really useful information to know that it's possible. But the concentration that it takes really takes an appropriate setting, and that's where, in the ideal world, it's in a monastery, and if that can't happen, then you select a quiet location that's free from any kind of interruptions, and you begin a pretty long-term practice to be able to deepen concentration to simply, just in the first jhana, one lets go of all the hindrances. And so that means, sleepiness, dullness, restlessness, worry, doubt, grasping, clinging. So not many of us in our ordinary reality have a chance to experience true letting go of all of the hindrances. But it's something to know that it's possible. And sometimes on retreats, we might have experiences. People give jhana retreats. And sometimes in those kind of retreats, and with a good guidance of a good teacher, it's possible to touch upon at least the first jhana and realize that it's something that's possible. But meanwhile, our practice really is getting back to that single object of the breath, or in some practices, the changing objects at each of the sense doors. We just keep building up those moments of mindfulness one after the next to have a deeper concentration. And then it happens on its own that we realize that the hindrances are not present. So I think for now, and some of you have some experience with jhana practices and know about them a little, so maybe we'll just have a little bit more discussion about it, but this mindset that we tend to have as Westerners to want to accomplish something. I want to get to the first jhana. I want to get to the second jhana. It can oftentimes bring up more tension in the mind that we actually don't want to have, that we want to let go of, that we want to just get back to developing, the fact that we have to work for years with help from a skilled teacher to overcome desire and anger and agitation and doubt, and, stick with the simple practices without having this grasping to wanting to get someplace else. It's useful to know about it and to know those things are possible. And when we compartmentalize to do studying, Buddhist studying, we learn about this. But then when we do our practice, we just do our practice. It's all about being present in the moment and doing our practice to see anicca, anatta, and dukkha. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we can talk about it.